myself, a galactic change agent. I am about change. I was basically, I'll just get this going now, but that's where I currently see the world at the moment. We live in a world of illusion. Probably another speaker will probably clarify some information as we've been going through as well. So it's basically a world where fact is portrayed as fiction and fiction is portrayed as fact. Now, I guess your mainstream news are probably an example of currently where we're at in the world, and change is long overdue. So I guess what method or mechanism does one utilise to distinguish the difference? So, you know, obviously your own internal knowing could come into play. For me, with my experience as a child and growing up with that, I became to trust my own instinct on what was real and what was not, and obviously as I went through studying the information, that was fine-tuned as well. And I guess what happens when we realise our reality has been manufactured, so you know, you basically can have an implosion with your reality, and so you've got to rebuild it. And the result of that can be awareness and explosion. And that's, you know, obviously truth is very important to me, and there's obviously different distinguishers of what truth actually means for most people, but it's very important to me. So I was born in 1970 at Bourke, New South Wales. Bourke's probably located in the central west of New South Wales. It's a small community of around 3,500 to 4,000 people at the time. I attended public school in Bourke. I actually didn't mind school at the time, and I always got my work done, but I always made sure no one else did. My parents relocated in Narromine to live, relocated to Narromine in 1990 to live with my parents after working on a sheep station. I started spray painting apprenticeship in 1990 and lived with my parents till probably about 1994. Now the contact began at around the age of 6, possibly younger. I'm assuming it's around that 5 to 6, and it continued frequently up to about the age of 20 or just before 21. Now, the important thing to remember is, although I was having that contact through my childhood, I wasn't actually fully aware of that contact until I reached the age of around 20 to 21. And that's basically when everything changed, everything really changed. And it's sort of continued throughout my life, the most recent one being around 2013, and the whole family went on that one. So the contact at age 8, I woke to find myself leaving my bedroom and levitating through the ceiling. Now, I had no sense of sound or a physical aspect to that, and I didn't, you know, it's just, well, I guess it was a very euphoric feeling as you're going through, just transcend straight to the wall. I didn't feel the wall, I didn't feel anything, but I was just aware of the feeling more than anything. So I could see the house from above and surrounding houses. So you imagine as I'm going up through the ceiling, I had the presence of mind to look around. I could see the other houses that were nearby. I could see our house and the neighbouring houses. And the night sky was quite clear. I don't recall much, if anything, moonlight. I know that it was a very starry night. And I could see, as I came up to the bottom of the craft, I could see the blacked out sky. So you can imagine looking at a starry night, and here's this black ring that contained no stars. So obviously there was a three-dimensional object above me. And as I approached, I could see the object was circular in the shape, and it took on a three-dimensional aspect. So I could actually see some of the street lights were actually resonating on the bottom of the craft as I became closer to the craft. Now I remember entering or nearing the craft, and it was at that point I basically lost memory of the event. So, moving forward. Now this was a very prominent, that would come up later, this contact event. So I was around about the age of 9. You know, it's a little bit sketchy because you get exact ages, because when you're a child you don't seem to remember, you know, the exact times and dates, but it's somewhere around this age. This one was Christmas Eve. So I woke in the early hours of the morning by a presence. Now this presence that you get when you're around the ETs, it's, if you talk about your 5 senses, this one's very different. This is like your DNA is activated. You talk about extrasensory perception. These are the channels that they use to communicate with you. I sat up in bed and looked at my doorway to see Santa Claus standing there, motionless. But this was quite very different. If you can imagine a movie of my bedroom, and within that movie there was a picture that was stuck in the doorway. So it didn't actually fit the scene, and there's reasons for that which I'll go into a little bit later. We had a brief telepathic conversation and I was instructed to go back to sleep. So there was no trauma experience, nor was any trauma the one I just told you about previously. So going from my childhood, there was no trauma involved with any experiences, and actually I looked forward to them. You know, I was actually kind of like my family and my friends, and then we'd go off in the craft and do special cool things, and that's where a lot of my schooling took place. And it kind of was at loggerhead with the mainstream schooling as well. They really clashed in ideals, and so a lot of times at mainstream school I would just zone out and not take any notice of what was really going on. Probably that's why I became a bit disruptive and made life hard for everyone else. So moving forward. So this is actually the picture that I drew. You can see the date, 1984. I remember this got to stand in front of the school and show it to everyone. So I always had that connection to the UFOs. You can see UFO, you can actually see Doctor Who TARDIS, and so that was always on my mind. I was always drawing a lot of symbols, and I had a very interest in the planets, the stars, that type of thing. Now, that took place at North Bourke. So, like I said, Bourke's a small community of around 3,500 to 4,000 people. North Bourke was probably located 5 kilometres from Bourke, and it was a much smaller community of probably a few hundred people, but they did have a pub. So that's for a lot of, growing up in Bourke, you made your own fun, normally involved camping, shooting, drinking. So we decided to camp at the riverbank, and I'd say, estimate that probably be 200 or 300 metres from the pub. And we decided to go and purchase some alcohol, and I was nominated because apparently I was the more gamer. So we went over and I went to the back door where the beer garden was, and I said to the guy, he probably thought I was going to get a packet of chips or some can of Coke, but he said, I want to buy a bottle of Stones Green Ginger wine. He said, well, how old are you? And I said, oh, I'm 14. He said, well, who's your father? So I told him my name, my father. He said, yeah, I know your dad. So, but he's dropped us off. He won't be back till tomorrow. I said, okay, I'll see the bottle of Stones Green Ginger wine. It was Bourke. That's just what happened in Bourke. So I remember we'd taken them back over to where we were camping, and it was probably, I'm assuming somewhere around 10:30, 11 o'clock that we decided to, I got a bottle of lemonade to go with the Stones Green Ginger wine as well. So a bottle of lemonade in this hand. And I was sitting in the chair, and I was just about to start mixing them. Then you can imagine a slow blink, and your eyes come back up. They were both empty in my hand. And I had this feeling of a lot had happened in that blink. And then I remember, the first thing I did was accuse my friends of taking it. So I turned to my left, they were gone. They were nowhere to be seen. And that's when, I think what happened here is the missing time event took place with the blink of the eyes, and I was put back in that same location, literally as if seconds have passed, but I think it was hours. I think I was gone for hours. And they put me back in that same spot, and in the process of that, the bottles became empty. So, and I didn't drink it, that's what you're thinking, this wasn't the cause of this. So, when I looked for my friends, and I remember taking a few steps to go looking for them, and then everything just went blank. And that was the last thing I remember. I woke up at 7 o'clock next morning in my swag with the thought of what just transpired the night before, as if what had happened. There's a missing time, a lot's happened. But, we all woke up together. I remember saying to my friends, what happened to you last night? I said, what do you mean? I said, well, I went looking for you and I couldn't find you. I said, well, we went looking for you and we couldn't find you. So then there's this missing time event that always seems to pop up. But life went on as usual. I functioned quite well after this one. There was no real trauma involved this one as well. Now that's the exact spot. So because I work in solar pumping, I actually do a bit of work back in my hometown. I currently live in Dubbo, which is about 3.5 hours from Bourke. Now that tree that you see over here, so that's where I was sitting when all this happened. That tree, this is 30 years later, this photo was taken. I found that spot, not by visually finding it, but walking across the top of the energy, and I can still feel that energy 30 years later. So there's an energy imprint still there. Because I remember walking around, I thought, well, that tree is a reference point, and I walked across the top and I thought, no, it's right here, it's right here. I didn't have to look anymore. So you probably see, just through the tree line, there's a bridge. It's a bit hard to see. You might see some lines going for the tree line. That's just over here to the left-hand side is where the pub was. So yeah, again, life went on as normal. Now, this is the one that changed absolutely everything for me. So the contact was at around, they're my two grandparents from both sides. So around the age of 21, now I felt with this one that I had a premonition that this was coming, even though I didn't really know what was coming. I just had an idea the days leading up to this contact event that a major shift or something was about to take place. And this also happened when my girlfriend had moved in. I was living with my parents at the time. My girlfriend had moved in and she had to go to Melbourne to do some training, so she was actually gone for the week that this one took place, and I have no doubt it happened for that reason. So I woke in the early hours of the morning with a feeling of presence in the room, and how I woke was I was lying on my back and my arm actually moved up and went back down. But what's interesting about this, I never had that thought to tell my arm to move. So it's quite a bizarre feeling. I'd actually been hijacked. So the test was to see if they had control of me, was to see if my arm moved and put it back down. There was no feeling on the arm, and there's the weirdest thing when your body does something without you telling it to do it. And I remember analysing the thought of not having the thought of telling my arm to move. Pretty much at that moment, I became aware that there were 4 greys around my bed. I'm pretty sure it was 4, it could have been 5, but there was a number of them around my bed. At this point in time, I began to struggle. Even though it wasn't a physical struggle, the war was actually going inside my head. So if you can imagine, if someone's filming me, I probably would have been still to look at, but I can just imagine I just tried to fight what was taking place, and simply because I felt like I no longer had control of my body. And that was probably, I'd gone from, I was experienced as a child, I'd gone from a child to a man, and now I felt I had the right to defend myself from whatever. So you can imagine a fully charged battery that was depleted in seconds. I really drained and I was out. And again, the feeling of going through the wall came through as well. You don't feel the wall, you don't feel anything. It's very, Naomi talks about, when you're in that presence of that mind and spirit, that's probably a good way to describe the feeling. One of the things I wanted to do while I was here today was actually describe the emotional and physical aspect of contact. So with the physical side of things, has anyone ever taken DMT, dimethyltryptamine? Yep, only a couple. You need to get on that. So what happens is you get a magnetic field, a humming inside your mind, and that's you crossing into the other dimension. So that's where, and dimethyltryptamine is one of the tools you can use to do that. Just research it before you jump in. So I began to struggle, and that was the feeling. That there was this one where I developed some of the fear became in from this contact, simply because I think I just matured as a person. So it wasn't a physical struggle, it was more of a mental struggle. Now, the following day, so my life took a very different transition from this point. It really, it's like hitting the T section on a highway. You go right or you go left. I went the opposite direction to what I would have gone had this event not taken place. So I woke as if a switch was flicked on. So you can imagine it's like a turn a switch on, then you're wide awake, and all the feelings that had happened the night before were already on my mind. And I was suffering from major sensory overload. I really can't put enough emphasis on that second line because essentially it nearly broke me. It really nearly broke me. So I had to go and query my parents to see if they were in the room or not, and I knew that they weren't, but I just thought I'd have to tick that box off just so that wasn't. So as the minutes and hours passed by, my entire life flashed before me like pictures in my third eye. So all these images coming back, I had these recollection of childhood experiences coming back. So the ones I just mentioned were flooding my mind. So it was a way of them telling me, letting me know that now's the time. You've had your fun as a teenager, but now we're going to take you on a very different path. So, and that was the message that came through. So I became very overwhelmed, and at the same time I got a download of information as well. There also was a sense of violation of my body, so I guess a sexual violation, which took place as well. And you know, obviously you've heard stories about the breeding programs. I can tell you they do exist, and I do believe that I'm part of that program. And if you ask me how I feel about that, if you had asked me back when I was 20, you know, I probably would have given you a very different answer to what I give you today. I'm okay with it now, I'm at peace with it now. But going through that, you know, I guess I had to work through that victim status in my early 20s, and that's the defining thing you need to take away from today is you don't stay in the victim status. Think bad things happen to good people, but it can make you more powerful than you could ever imagine. Once you work through the grief and the stages of grief, and that time can take whatever for different people. It's your own pace. Now the information that I got, and it's hard to I guess give a description of how the information came into me. It's not like a schoolroom way of learning where you sit down and you have a visual and you write. It was very, very different. It was like it accessed my basically genetic structure. So it was very different to any form or method I had learnt before. I would say it sits in my DNA. It's deeper than mind. So it's at the very core of who I am. And in that way it actually drives a lot of my decisions going forward. You know, I access that information, I get a feel for it, and then I move forward and make decisions based on that. So I'll go back over the following days, months, and even years were the most difficult of my life. And I'll say if there's one thing, the most challenging part of this was getting through that. And that's probably my biggest accomplishment, was survive that 6 to 12 months. So I wasn't sleeping, I was basically sleeping with one eye open. Because the fear did come in. I'll be honest with you, like you'll see some challenging information here, but I'm just going to give it to you how it happened. So I'm not going to desensitise it, I'm not going to glorify it, it'll be exactly how I experienced it, and that's the purpose of my talk. So I was always on guard, you know, literally, I'll give you an example of just what I went through. I was a spray painter at the time. I started work at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was sleeping through till the sun came up. And my hours of sleep was sunrise for an hour and a half, 2 hours, get up and go to work. And that was my sleep pattern. Because I was just simply not prepared to go back to sleep. And the following months, they were coming back quite regularly. But one of the things that I found, the pre-markers to a contact event, was the humming and the magnetic fields. It's not humming from your ears, it's internal humming. And that's what happens when you cross into the other dimensions. And if you do get to try DMT, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So I had enhanced energy, which also contributed to not sleeping. And I had a massive thirst for information. I was really driven to go out and research and understand what I'd been told. Now, I also was looking for validation of what I've been told, because essentially I thought maybe I'm some type of experiment where they're stitching me up and then they're monitoring my reactions to certain scenarios, and some type of study. So I've really entertained every possible scenario for this information and how it came into my life. And you know, you do question your own sanity at times, especially in my 20s, and I had to do that. I really had to tick that box to say yes, I'm okay. Now, I felt as if I'd been constantly watched and monitored, even from within. So we talk about some of the implants that can take place. They can actually technically see what you're seeing. They can actually monitor you, you know, as far as the old GPS tracking, that's old technology. But I've had a degree of paranoia about that. I felt like I was being, wherever I went, it followed me. And I became, and as I said, that sort of took place in the first 6 to 12 months. Now, that wasn't their shit, that was my shit to work through. So if you're thinking about, you know, the purpose of all this, so my young bloke just walked in. So if you're thinking about the purpose, like I had to work through my fear, I had to get through that. And what happened with my fear levels, well, they were very, very elevated. But what came through that, once I got on top of those fears, every other fear left me. So not did I master that fear, because it raised the bar. It was the ultimate fear of being taken out of your bedroom, outside of any control, So when I got on top of that, all the other fears left my body. And I think that was the purpose behind some of that as well. So it's really, we talk about control of fear. There's really the emotion that controls humanity. So going forward, that was a very valuable lesson to me to master that and overcome fear. And I had probably fears of snakes, and they're all gone. They literally just disappeared. Once I mastered that, they left. Now, there was also a strong awareness of people's thoughts and emotions, how they were aligned. That was simple. I could actually walk past someone and tell you what they were thinking and how they were aligned, what their morals were, what their values were. So it was very, very intense. And also, you know, you have your issues with that too, because sometimes you don't want to know what people are thinking. So there was that, you know, I had to fine tune that as well, you know, obviously protect my own space. And I guess the reality of what had been happening my entire life hit pretty hard. You know, I've been raised, I had a good family structure. There was no drugs or alcohol in my home. I had 2 loving, caring parents. It was just myself and my sister. My sister is also very, very awake as well. And she doesn't have a lot of memory, but I'm sure there's contact that took place as well. So one of the things that came through was the sense of worldly dysfunction, deceit upon humanity, and you've heard some of that over the last day or so. And it's really where we're currently at the moment in the world. Yes, we actually need warriors at the moment. And I'm talking about guns. I'm talking about information warriors, you know, spiritual warriors, and people that actually get out and prepare to share the information, because we do need change. And I think the best change is the change that you basically empower yourself, and then you resonate that empowerment. And the tipping point is, you know, I don't think it's 50%. For the world to change, I'm guessing 20 to 25 is probably going to be enough. And we'll get into the quantum mechanics of that a little bit later on as well. So that's a scoop mark. It's very common with contactees to have scoop marks. That one's on my left knee. Essentially what they are taking DNA samples, but also at the same time they can encase your implants within your own skin, and that's so that the body doesn't reject the implant, because it doesn't see it as a foreign body. It's like when you get a burr in your skin, your body will reject that, whereas this is a little bit different. So that's actually quite a medical technology right there. Now, you see the date, 5th of 7th, 05. The shape of that, you can imagine a sphere with the top third cut off. So it's like a dome, it's very shiny. And I obviously had a contact event somewhere around this date, I don't remember it. But it was actually taken off right here. And it was stuck so well, I got out of the shower and I'd noticed, I thought, what's that? And I could just feel it, I actually feel it tingling. And we couldn't pull it off. So my wife actually got a razor blade behind it and ran the razor blade right down behind it to slice it off. And I didn't cut myself, but it was stuck that well, it was not coming off. So it was there for, I'd say, to stay for a long time. Now, I'll probably just jump over to and elaborate on this. My feeling of this is that it's basically the curriculum that we need to go forward is on that. For a new world is actually on that. That was my gut feeling at the time. And I didn't feel a need to do too much with it, because I don't think we're quite ready for some of the information I believe is contained on that. So you can imagine a whole new curriculum, a whole new schooling, a whole new way of life that we need to adopt and follow. And look, some of us are already on that path. So we actually come down for a Nexus conference, and my wife had got in online and she'd booked a booking through a medium. And one just popped out to her. So we'd travelled down and I dropped her off and I'd gone into town, and she was there for an hour and I've come back to pick her up. And I had no time to make any eye contact with this medium. And she came out and she said, yeah, you owe me $70. I said, well, why's that? She said, well, the whole entire reading was about you. So I said, what kind of information came through? And she said, well, at first, she said she described top hats above you, but she didn't really know what the top hats were. But then as she was describing them, then she realised that, they're UFO craft. And then she went on to describe my contact all through my childhood. And I thought, well, you don't guess that stuff. You just don't guess that. And so I thought she must be pretty good. So I had a phone link up with her probably, I would say probably 3 to 6 months later. I made no reference as to who I was or in reference to my wife. And the same information came through about the contact. So I thought, well, it's probably, I'll actually go along and see this person. So we made a booking. This was probably about 6 months later. And I sat down with her and, she actually went out the back and she said, I've got something for you. And she said, it belongs to my husband. He's probably going to be upset that I bought it out because it's his stash. So he come out with an alien head and sat it in front of me. It was a grey alien head. So that was just why, obviously she knew what it meant. So we went through some of the experiences as a child, and I'm interested about the upgrades and how that was implemented. She said, well, you can imagine getting your DNA and stretching your DNA and then inserting information into that DNA and then closing it again. And so that happened at the age around 5 to 6, and so there was more. That, obviously, as I went through my teenage years, that DNA changes softened a little bit. But we got talking for quite some time, and that's when she also said, I asked her about this implant and what it meant, and she correlated the same story that I just told you. Said the world isn't quite ready for this information yet, but there will come a time when it will be needed. Now, it is in a safe and secure location, that's why you guys know about it. So if I get raided, you're not going to find it. But one other thing that came through is that as I was winding it up, we went over time because I started talking about some of the, I guess the dark side of stuff that's going on the planet. And I told her about some of that information. She said, you know what, a guy just walked out of here literally at the same time you walked in. He said, you would have near passed him. And I said, no. And she said, well, they're saying, my guides are telling me, here's his phone number, you need to ring him. So I think that was on a Tuesday. I think I rang him on a Wednesday. And we had probably a 10-15 minute discussion. And he said, look, can I come and see you? And I said, yeah, that's no worries. So he drove 12 hours to come and see me. I'd never met this guy before. And he stayed at my home for a week. And that guy's sitting right there. So we became good friends, and that was 2 years ago, Brad? Yeah, 2 years ago. So this is the power of this stuff, This is how you can make connections and how you network with people. And you guys, have a great opportunity to network with one another. These are great events of networking. So some of the traits that I guess developed, and this is probably fairly common across most contactees, are ecological concerns against destroying or contaminating the environment, social injustice concerns, namely control. I looked at all species of life as equal. Just because you have the ability to exploit another species doesn't mean you should. Extremely protective of personal freedoms. Developed a very strong voice on my beliefs. So this got me a fair bit of hot water in my 20s. Because I was I grew up in Bourke. In Bourke, I was quite an aggressive young child. I was a very problematic child. And I gave my parents a lot of grief growing up. But I always felt protected. I always felt, because I guess when I had the awakening at 20, you can imagine it's like they showed me a movie of how things were going to happen. There's going to be certain little things along the way that I would distinguish and get some type of idea on the timeline. There's that time word again, but I always felt a little bit protected through all of that. I felt like, there was going to be there to support me if I needed it. And I guess one example, when I was about 17, some friends and I had gone out to a property at Forge Bridge to go camping and for the weekend, and it just finished raining, and we were turning around in the buggy and we rolled the buggy, and it rolled into my friend's hand and broke his hand. So we're literally 30 kilometres out of Forge Bridge and then another hour from Forge Bridge to Bourke. So we said, oh, well, we better take him back to the hospital and get him fixed up. But we had to go past Forge Bridge pub on the way, and that was the problem. So I think someone said, who's up for a beer? And I said, well, yeah, we're in. So we left at 1 o'clock in the morning, all drunk, and I remember my mate driving the car and he's all over the road, and I said, well, how about you let me drive? So we rolled that car 6 times. So we end over end, and all of us got out, and I had a tiny little cut behind my ear, and that was it. And the route should have found us about, I think it must have been 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember after we stopped rolling, I remember we rolled up an embankment, up into a levee bank, and all 4 wheels were off the ground. I remember my mate beside me woke up and said, what are we doing parked here? I said, mate, we just rolled the car. He said, well, I'm sleeping in the back. So he got out and slept in the back, and another guy slept on the ground. So when the roost shooter found us, who called the ambulance, he actually thought we were dead because we were scattered all across the paddocks. And so he rang the ambulance, police turned up. Luckily they didn't put us in the bag, being locals, they kind of looked after a little bit, things are different now. So they put me in the ambulance and they pulled up the front of the hospital and they said, go inside, literally only 10 metres from the door, and said, go inside, someone look after you. And I was petrified. I said, if I go in here, my parents are going to know about this. I said, yeah. No, I said, see you, mate. And as he drove off, I went straight at the back, washed all the blood off me. 2-minute walk home, walked in front door, and Mum and Dad said, how's the weekend? I said, it was great. They still didn't know that story until about 10 years ago. I actually told them, so I never got caught for that one. So again, going back to the fear thing as well, all fears were gone. Became very health conscious. So my wife and I went through our home, removed all the toxic chemicals, your toothpaste, your shampoos, all those things, your dishwashing liquids, fly sprays, throw them in the bin, just use a squatter, stuff like that. And I had to develop a massive appetite for information, so I started amassing large amounts of books, namely not just on ufology, but see, ufology is actually a topic not just on UFOs. Ufology can embrace a very broad range of topics. Energy work, obviously sacred geometry, all those things that you heard about in the last couple of days. It does encompass a lot of that for a contactee. Not so much a UFO researcher, but as a contactee, that's what you tend to embrace. So the research that I studied was concerning the control mechanisms on planet Earth, many of which go back hundreds, in some cases thousands of years. Now I was to do this covertly in the early period, simply because I told me to fly under the radar, now is not your time, you'll be utilised later on. So I looked at things like the monetary system, the financial system obviously, I looked at the health system, I studied the role of cancer, how it operates in the body, and what I kind of realised that all these answers to these questions are already known. They're already out there, just that it's suppressed information. Then I began to realise, well, why is it so suppressed? This is the information that I had, but I was looking for validation of what the information I had because I wanted to prove it to myself as well. And everywhere I looked, I basically found what I was looking for. So I was also given some of the transitions to take place with regards to humanity with the DNA activation. We're looking at such as CMEs, that's a coronal mass ejection. We talk about solar flares that come from the sun. They have charged particles. They hit your DNA and they stimulate your DNA and it gets activated. So if you're carrying around a lot of internal rubbish that you haven't dealt with, that's going to do it for you. So you're going to have to deal with this stuff because you're internally being realigned and you have to clean out the closet. And that's also a way of going forward as well. Healthy mind, healthy body, healthy spirit. So also preparations I need to take in order to prepare for these changes events. I was really drawn to not just every aspect of my life, taking back control of my life. My wife and I purchased some land about 7 years ago. So we have designed an off-grid home from scratch. So everything at home we have hand-built and done ourselves. I study electrical principles and I've designed and built the own off-grid solar system as well. The home is also a giant Faraday cage, so it is protected from CMEs to a certain degree and also MPs from a potential nuclear strike. So all that Faraday cage, all that means is you can imagine a giant bubble wrapped with foil and you have mesh on that as well. All your steel beams are earthed down to earth stakes. And also all the cables inside the home, what they call drive cable, a metal sheathed cable, so they're also protected from some of these charged particles as well. Now I've got some photos of that coming up, so you'll get to see that. Now, yeah, again, I guess a lot of this, I guess you would call it an embedded knowing. Even though I had this knowledge, I just had this going forward, I kind of always had this idea of how this was going to roll out at the same time. Like, imagine being in that movie, you've been shown the movie, and you've been shown certain events within that movie, and you're also shown your role within that movie. So that's probably the best way I could probably describe it. So this is what you would call a CME event, coronal mass ejection. So you have charged particles emitting from the sun. They can disrupt a lot of your electrical grid, especially the thing with the grid, you've got these wires hanging everywhere across the globe. They suck all that in, can take out transformers, that type of stuff. Now, all the stuff I'm telling you today is not to alarm you. It's not the course that I'm trying to message across. We're going to talk about fear. You know, you have to let go of your fears of this stuff. So just remember that. So these are some of the topics that I studied. It was obviously money creation and control. You look at the Federal Reserve banking system. It is a privately owned system. They create the money themselves. They lend it to governments. They create wars to put governments into debt so they can control the governments even more. And then what they do is actually, as collateral, the government starts to give assets across, as obviously Eleni. So they're your national parks and those type of things as well. There's been a lot of, I guess, a lot of influence over money. You know, if you've seen some of the people who have been assassinated, you know, some of the presidents, especially a lot of it is protecting the money control. It really is their main source of control, other than emotional control. And to do that, they realise, well, if we're going to take control of the money sector, we need control of media, because that is what people will correlate to, and that's how we're going to control the masses. So if you look at media influence control, it is mainly fear-based. And if you look at the way they deliver news, is that they'll give you the story. And it's funny, look, it seems to be the same stuff, 7 o'clock every time. You know, you're going to some atrocities in the world. And I'm not saying they don't happen, but I'm just saying the reasons as to why they happen. They don't tell you about that. So, and then they always finish with the sport and the weather. So what that essentially does, that's put straight in your subconscious. The idea of the sport and the weather is desensitise the whole information you just learnt, to filter it through, and you don't think about what you've just learned, so you're storing that information, and that also is developing your subconscious the way they want to develop it. Government schooling techniques, who funded and created the system. And Rockefeller Institute put a lot of funding into designing the Western education system, and one of the things was to take out creative thinking. So they basically, we've already got the answer, you just got to memorise what you've been told, and you get marked on how good your memory is, not opposed to, you know, solving a problem. You know, they've basically got all the questions already there for you. So there's an enormous amount of research has gone into the government schooling techniques to find it and fine-tune it how they want it to be. And look at some of the Gonski reforms, they've taken out the arts. They're all creative thinking techniques that they don't want you to utilise. And that's why they've taken out the music, some of that dropped. Now, ancient history, I've spent a lot of time looking at ancient history. I think everything you need to know about the history of this planet is already there. It's just that they've modified the meaning of that history. You've got pyramids all over the planet, you've got an enormous amount of information that is stored within these Sumerian texts, the tablets. Look at the work of Zecharia Sitchin. Now, I know this next one is controversial, and I know I'm not here to judge anyone for any decision they've made, but I am here to tell you the path that I took on the dangers of vaccinations. You probably saw my little boy walking a while ago. I have 2 children, they are not vaccinated. And I did that also based on not a belief system, but also a research point of view. So, and one of the things that came through very strong with my contact was the vaccination program. And if you look at some of the things like Agenda 21, where they're looking at, so like, I guess, well, I think I've spoken about this, well, I only checked the other day, there's 7.5 billion people currently on the planet, and there's 3,000 people that's potentially controlling those 7.5 billion. So the agenda is to move towards, you're not going to see too much free energy released until the population is somewhat shrunk down. So even they know their model that they've implemented for the last couple of decades is fatally flawed, because the resources and the pollution of the planet that they kept to control the masses actually is destroying the place. So even they know that it has a timeline built into it. And so in order to do that, so one of the tools that they may use is vaccines to control the population. And depending on where you live in the world, if you live in some of the African countries, you're probably more likely to get some of those bad doses. And also, you're seeing a lot of kids today have reactions to certain foods and elements as well. I know my 2 boys are very susceptible to any processed foods. So we've really got to watch their diet. So again, if you haven't watched, I saw a guy walking around with a Vax t-shirt earlier on, but if you haven't watched it, watch it. Okay, just watch Vaxxed and make up your own mind on, you look at the way the data's been trending. It's basically a whistleblower from within the CDC, which is the Centre for Disease Control. They've basically hidden the data and changed the data, and he kept some original copies of that data and released it to obviously some researchers. So that's how it's come into play. So they are in damage control. You're going to see more of a push against anti-vaxxers. Don't be alarmed by that, because that's them going the offensive to defend what they've got. So they're actually on the defensive by going offensive. Shadow government sponsored terrorism, you know, that's probably don't talk too much. I guess you guys are pretty up to speed on some of that stuff. Obviously September 11 is the big one that everyone seems to talk about. We actually had our own September 11 in Australia. It's called Port Arthur. If you look into some of the things that happen at Port Arthur, you'll be quite alarmed, and it's really does, you see, look, it's the brainchild of the same people that designed September 11. Actually, anyone know about the invalid constitution that we had? Did anyone know about that? No? Well, when we joined the League of Nations in, I think, the 10th of January 1920, we had to have our own independent sovereign constitution. So there should have been a referendum to take place to enact that constitution. So essentially for the whole period of time up to when we voted, I think it was around the same time we voted to become a republic, and also voted to bring the GST in. What essentially happened, the Institute of Taxation Research realised that we hadn't enacted our constitution, so fair we're using the constitution of a foreign body, which was the UK. So the High Court ruled, and this is purely on taxation, the ITR said that, well, if the constitution is invalid and all government bodies derive their authority from the constitution, by default there's no valid statutory body in the country. So the High Court ruled that to be the case, even though the High Court had no authority to rule on it, because they derived their authority of the constitution. So it was this complex situation. So that's why you actually, one of the reasons you voted for a republic was to enact the current constitution that was invalid. You're not going to read about that anywhere, but the ITR was heavily involved in the research of that. I do have some High Court documents and some papers on that at home as well. And that was one of the reasons that also to disarm the country, because technically there was no valid law in the country at the time. Look at natural earth changes. Some of that can also come from the CMEs that we spoke about earlier. You know, you get frequencies resonating the planet, moving the tectonic plates. There's some Mitch Batros has got some good information on that if you want to search him up. Weaponised systems, we're going into scalar technology, HARP technology, and yes, they are chemtrailing. I know they've been doing that in the Dubbo region for at least 8 years. I've filmed planes, literally 5 of them flying nearly side by side in a line, and we just don't get that in Dubbo. We're a regional area, we don't have a lot of flights come over. Studied common law. Now, common law is basically the foundation of building block of the Constitution, and if I guess the example of a common law police force would be a posse, you imagine. So common law is like an unwritten law, it's a law of the community. I'm actually married under common law, so what that essentially means is that, see, when you deal with the government and they get you to sign the dotted line, you just enacted a contract with the government. So the same as the employment declaration form, you've just signed a contract and say, yes, please take tax out of my money, out of my wage. That's essentially what they do. If they didn't need your signature, they wouldn't ask for it. So the Marriage Act of 1961 is about 1,200 pages of legislation. You've actually agreed to that 1,200 page legislation. Again, I'm not telling this to alarm you, but I decided not to. I actually rang Birth, Deaths and Marriages and I said, can I get a copy of that? And he said, well, no one's ever asked that before. So he emailed it and I flicked through it. And he said, what do you want to know? I said, well, I just want to know what's in there. Yeah. And the Family Law Act 1975 is in there. So any amendment and changes. So technically, when you go back to the vaccines, you know, if they pass a law for the Family Law Act, you've actually consented unknowingly through the Marriage Act. So we got into the dangers of fluoride, calcifies the pineal gland, it's like your receptor to the bigger universe. So, you know, you can study that as well. You can go back to, they use it in concentration camps. And also household ingredients, I've touched that. Now the dangers of GM foods, there's a lot of nanotechnology built into genetically modified foods, disruptors in your intestine, there's killing bees, that type of thing, affecting your gut bacteria, which also is you get your gut feeling, which obviously correlates with the brain and the mind. So I'll just put that up for a bit of a giggle, but. So, now, this is essentially 16 years ago and we're still looking for, you know, that open investigation of what happened. I don't think it'll come in the current environment. I heard Trump is probably looking to get some of that going as well, but I don't think you're going to see too much. And don't focus too much on the old. You know, we can go over this over and over again, but I'm way past time. Increased terrorist events, more intrusive legislation to monitor citizens, stronger push against non-vaccinators. This may come in the form of manufactured viruses. This is happening now, has been happening for the last decade. Increase of living expenses, utilities and mortgages. So if you want to, this is also social engineering. So you're looking at controlling the money flow and people's finances, and that also shrinks the population because people tend not to have as many children. So that's all built into it as well. Organic producers targeted, Monsanto are targeting these people, shutting them down. Natural holistic health practices. Now, I don't know if you've been following some of the deaths in America of health practitioners. I had a look at some of the old man males not long ago. There was 30, I think we're up over 100 are basically getting knocked off. The TPP debate will probably get reignited in another form, maybe 12, 18 months, 2 years away. Microchipping of people. Now, I don't think we're at this point now. I just don't think the population is going to adhere to that. I just don't think, even with people well involved in the matrix system and mind control, I just don't think they're going to quite adopt that. But it's going to take something major to happen to influence that, and we may be looking at possibly a false flag invasion or something. And these are reasons that they'll use: protect our children, criminals, domestic violence, healthcare reform, travel, removal of cash, and also, you know, monitoring of pedophiles. And don't get me wrong, I want that stuff cleaned up more than anyone. But what's the price we're going to pay for microchipping of people? You know, some of this information they can access your, I guess, probably at your DNA level, and accessing what you're thinking and all that type of stuff. You don't conform to the system, they can potentially turn off your chip. It doesn't allow you to function in this world. So this is where humanity currently sits, alone in the universe. If not, they'll invade us. Hollywood has essentially done a lot of that, movies and books. So you've got to realise they control everything: religion, Hollywood, music, education system, a whole lot. Nothing escapes. So this one evolved from monkeys, and well, I think you've heard enough information in the last day to realise that's just a fairy tale. And you've only got to stick your head outside to see the answer to that. I mean, if even look at Darwinism, how we advance to our environment, or our predators will evolve us to counteract some of those situations. What the hell happened to humans to do this to us, other than genetic manipulation or enhancement? So I think, and that's also written in some of the Sumerian text. You'll see that they make reference to some of that as well. And I always want to instill in you that we need our government to protect us from the bad. And in actual fact, they are the bad. So still finding the cure for cancer. You've seen the movement within medicinal cannabis. The only reason that's happening is because they're happening at the grassroots. And the pharmaceuticals wanted to jump on board before they lost total control. Because people were just bypassing laws. And when family are dying, you will do what you need to do to protect your loved one and make sure your loved one survives. So that's why. Free energy does not exist. It does. Vaccine protect us. Go to school, pay taxes, acquire assets, retire. Media's act on world events. Anyone who doesn't believe this today is crazy. The system is essentially policed by its own people. Solutions: become informed and self-aware. Bearing in mind intelligence and awareness are totally two different things. You can be highly intelligent and totally unaware of what's going on. They are two different mindsets. And you need to, once you become someone who is intelligent and totally aware, well, you've got someone that you don't want to come up against. So the absolute truth is very complex and mainly due to disinformation. Trust your gut instinct. 90 to 95% of information is disinformation. Rid your life of toxins, healthy body, mind, no thoughts, work towards self-sufficiency. Let go of materialism. This is harder than what you think. You have been bombarded with advertising since the day you were born, and this is not an easy one to let go. Does it fit with your model? Does it fit with your life mission? If it does, technology is okay. We're here because of technology. With the craft coming back, they use technology to interact in the dimensions as well. Fund alternative news sources. Nexus Magazine, seminars are all excellent. Things like this are great. Support these type of events. This is how we get information out. Become an activist. Don't fear change. I welcome change. If the world's in chaos, I welcome chaos. Why? Because if nothing changes, nothing changes. If we keep going down the path we're going, they're just grabbing more power, more control, so we want things to be disruptive, so we can change the old for the birth of the new. Now, humanity has been targeted at the molecular level. Don't participate in it. That's obviously align yourself with like-minded people. Most importantly, don't waste your life on others that are not aware. Now that might sound a bit harsh, but they're just going to drag you down. Okay. Their time will come, and that's their journey. The universe has a plan for that. This is the event we had in Dubbo. We had UFO above our shed for probably 15 minutes. It was all filmed, 2014. Mariana Flynn's at the top. She spoke at the Access Access conference last weekend. That's our start of the off-grid home. That's our veggie patch, which is all non-GM seeds. That's our home. Still wet. That's actually quite an old photo. That's the solar system that I've designed and built, which runs the home. We have all the mod cons and luxuries. You don't have to live in the cave because you're off-grid. Even this is old technology, but it's still pretty good. Now, I want you to think about everything you've ever learnt. From the time you took your first breath, from the time you open your eyes, your first sounds, thoughts, feelings for present day, and everything in between. Now remove everything that you have not individually verified to be accurate and truthful, and ask yourself what's left. I would say to you that the majority of people don't have any opinions whatsoever. They have rejected mainstream views. That's my email. If you want to contact me, or if you want to talk to me outside, that's fine as well. But feel free to ring me anytime, or any questions that you want to. I'm happy to help you on the path. I said the important thing is, if you're in the victim status, remove yourself from that status. You will get stuck there and you won't transcend. And that's basically it.